Sigzil's words echoed in his head. Life before death, strength before weakness, journey before destination. Kaladin looked up at the crack of sky, like a faraway river of pure blue water. Life before death. What did that saying mean? That men should seek life before seeking death? That was obvious. Or did it mean something else? That life came before death? Again, obvious. And yet the simple words spoke to him. Death comes, they whispered. Death comes to all. But life comes first. Cherish it. Death is the destination, but the journey, that is life. That is what matters. Brandon Sanderson is one of the most prolific authors of fantasy fiction, also dipping his toe into sci-fi and contemporary fiction and a few other bits and pieces depending on how you define certain categories. He has been one of my favorite authors since I first read the Mistborn trilogy the year my son was born. I needed something to do to keep my mind occupied while my son woke up in the middle of the night and needed bottles and feeding and all that kind of stuff. And without a doubt, he has formed one of the biggest parts of my taste in fiction as an adult reader. He probably has the distinction of being the author that, after Harry Potter in my childhood, was the next obsession of my life. Without a doubt, I have enjoyed absolutely everything I have ever read that man has written, and that would be, without fail, the worst of his books. The books of his that I enjoyed the least were still 3.5-star reads or more. I think that is the lowest grade I have ever given anything that he has ever written. I have enjoyed things like Tress of the Emerald Sea, which is a light adventure story, much more in the vein of I guess you'd say a Peter Pan or a fun, childlike kind of adventure. The Stormlight Archives, such as The Way of Kings, which is a really heavy, dense tome of a thing. The Mistborn series, which is sort of halfway between those things. Novellas like Legion or The Emperor's Soul, which, by the way, I would highly, highly recommend. And I can't speak highly enough of how much of a fan I am of the man's work as a general rule of thumb. But there has been what I would consider a slightly worrying trend in his books that are leading me to take slightly less joy out of what he produces. And it's something that I think is becoming more prevalent, and it really has been for the past 2 decades or so, with the MCUification of media as a whole. So we've all sort of been, if you're old enough, familiar with the idea of connected universes, the idea of, Marvel or DC that have had these deep connected worlds where characters from different properties can find their way into other things, or Easter eggs and hints towards things that you perhaps wouldn't know about unless you were a truly dedicated reader of the genre. And, examples of that being Wolverine was a character that first appeared in the Hulk. The Avengers team-ups as a whole are a perfect proof of concept. And this was not something that was a mainstream thing in media during my childhood, at least certainly not that I can recall at all. Normally, media stayed in its lane and franchises stayed in their own universes, to a point where oftentimes they were made in direct opposition to each other, and the idea of them crossing over seemed insane. But now I've had Batman and the Ninja Turtles, I've had The Undertaker in Scooby-Doo, and the idea of universal crossovers is now something that not only is nothing surprising at all, but it's also completely to be expected. It's made the leap from a comic book niche property to something that I think is super duper widespread. And On the one hand, that can create a really rich, detailed storytelling environment. It can make worlds feel bigger and more complex than they've ever been before. But there is a counterpoint to that. The Phase 1 Marvel films are a perfect example of films that you can watch as a standalone in each case. You can watch Thor having seen nothing else. You can watch Ant-Man having seen very little, and even if you haven't seen other films, you'll probably pick it up. And that's not a Phase 1 film. You can look at Iron Man 2, you'll still be okay. Each part of the franchise begun as something that could be watched independently. You could watch Thor 1 and 2 and not need to have seen everything else to enjoy it and to continue watching. You will miss Easter eggs, you'll miss hints at things, there may be little teeny plot beats that are not as well explained as they might be if you have seen everything, but you'll mostly be okay. And that's fine. I have no problem with that at all. I don't have a problem with crossovers in universes where you miss little Easter eggs or hints, that you'll have a more detailed and richer watching experience if you have seen more context surrounding the particular story that you're watching. But the issue that I had with the MCU is eventually it got to the point where you can't watch any of the MCU films without having seen all of the previous MCU films. And that is something that I am beginning to worry about with Sanderson. When I read Mistborn 1, 2, and 3, it didn't matter that he'd already published Elantris. It didn't matter that the Stormlight Archive was around the corner. I'm not even sure of the release order of those books because it didn't matter. When I read the Stormlight Archives, by and large, through books 1, 2, 3, kind of 4, you could read those books completely independently, never having read another piece of Sanderson's fiction, and you will miss very little. You will, miss Hoyd, or you'll miss hints at things, little Easter eggs and bonuses that are so cool when you're a Sanderson fan, but you could still keep with the main thrust of the narrative. It wasn't until I was reading the end of Mistborn Era 2, so I'm going to put a spoiler alert up for this. It wasn't until Mistborn Era 2, and even within Mistborn Era 2, it was only the last 2 novels. It wasn't a problem for Alloy of Law and Shadows of Self? Yeah. I found that it wasn't a problem there, but in the last 2, there were references to things and references to people and references to investiture and things of that nature that, honest to goodness, even though I had read every other book in the series, I still wasn't entirely sure what was happening. And that was something that, while the story in and of itself and the world in and of itself was good enough that I wasn't, I was able to keep pushing through, I felt like I honestly missed something more than an Easter egg in understanding what was going on. And I'm not a person that goes through Dragonsteel or, any online forums or subreddits. I'm not that kind of a reader. I'm the kind of person, I will dedicatedly read an author and all their work, but I'm not necessarily going to do any digging past that point. And it was The Lost Metal where I legitimately felt like I missed out on something. And then I had a discussion with my brother, who is the kind of nerd that goes through online forums and subreddits and has discussions with people and really digs deep into things. Actually, both of my brothers are kind of like this. Shout out, lads. But my brother was able to sort of explain to me in a few ways how certain things worked, who certain people were, what the references kind of were, and I got a much better understanding of what the story was about and what it was that I felt like I was missing. And I had to ask the question, could I have understood this book completely without having gone beyond the text? Could I simply have read the 4 books in this trilogy? It's kind of quadrilogy, but Alloy of Law was not really supposed to count. Anyway, could I have just read that core of the text and fully understood what was going on. And on one level, I think the answer to that question was maybe yes-ish. But honestly, I think to have a full, proper understanding of the text itself, I needed extra textual material. And therein lies my problem with where I'm worried that Sanderson is going. As the Cosmere begins to bleed together and become much more of an MCU-style shared universe, for those of you that have finished Wind and Truth or The Lost Metal or The Sunlit Man, more and more of these things it's becoming apparent that I'm going to need a working knowledge not only of every book in the Cosmere, but also extraneous extra back detail that I'm going to need to go somewhere else to find. And this might just be, I don't know, maybe I wasn't discerning enough when reading, or maybe I missed details, but I'm honestly feeling as though I am heading down a pathway that I'm not prepared to follow. I obsess over books. I really do love to read them, and I'm a rereader, and I'll go through a text multiple times, but I don't want to spend time researching before or after or during reading a book just so I can understand what's going on. So I'm not sure if it's just me, I'm not sure if I'm over-exaggerating, or maybe it won't reach sort of a critical mass point. I don't know. And I'm prepared to acknowledge that things like Era 3 of Mistborn are going to be a different beast, right? I'm going to need to understand Eras 1 and 2 of Mistborn. That's okay. I don't mind if it's a sequel in a series, me having to understand the series prior to that point. But, for example, given Era 3 is, the working title I think is Ghostbloods, am I going to need a working understanding of the Stormlight Archive to read Mistborn Era 3? And then further to that point, is having a working knowledge of what happened in Stormlight Archive going to be enough? Or am I going to need more than that? Am I going to need to go to Dragonsteel and find out more information about these things than I already have? So I'm curious and concerned that eventually we're going to get to a point where I'm going to have to read a master's thesis in order to fully understand what's going on in this universe. So I just wanted to have a chat about that and sort of express my feelings and my worry on this, because I'm really concerned that I'm going to lose touch with one of my favorite authors of all time, one of the people who, as an adult reader, like I said, had the same sort of impact that Harry Potter had on me as a young reader. And that, as lame as it sounds, that legitimately worries me. I don't want to, lose my gateway into this whole thing. And I know it's silly. It's like when people say, they've remade a film and they've ruined it. You still have those originals, you still have those films, and I still have all of his back catalog, and he hasn't yet crossed that threshold. I can still enjoy everything that I'm reading. But I just wanted to have a chat about that and how I feel a little concerned about it. So what do you think? Is the sort of MCUification of the Cosmere and any, fantasy world or any book series really, are you okay with having to have understandings of books that are not necessarily related to the one that you're reading, but are by the same author? Or are you one of those people that's more than happy to go and do the online research and, read the website and the blog and find out all the little hints and truths, which can be a fun thing to do on its own, but I don't want it to be required reading. So what are your thoughts about it? Drop a comment below and tell me what you think. And yeah, let's have that discussion, because I'm really keen to hear what you think. As for now, I am the hairiest host that loves books the most. I am SilverBear, and this is the sweetest little bear that was ever in there. That is Honey Bear, and I will see you on Monday.